today. My name is Chris Beitler, and Carl Eskridge and Tim Clare are here with me, and the three of us constitute the Joint Public Agency Board. With that, I would ask you to take note of the notice of open meetings posted by the door in the back that govern our meetings. Public comment is very welcome. A total of 5 minutes is the rule unless allowed longer time. And the only thing that we ask is that those testifying introduce themselves for the record. Agenda item number 3 is entitled Reports and Communications Received, and in that regard we have a somewhat unusual item, I think, to be introduced to us by our staff. And so, Brandon, please go ahead.
Sure. Brandon Kaufman, Treasurer for the JPA. So we have an item here. We've got Gilmore Bell. We have Mike Rogers from Gilmore Bell. He's our bond counsel for the city and the JPA. But we recently went through kind of tax compliance to review for not only the city but also the JPA to ensure that we continue to comply with the tax compliance rules of the IRS for private use as part of tax-exempt bonds. So Mike's here to basically give an overview of that process.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me here. I have this I'd like to, I brought, I know you've had the full report in your packet, but I brought a summary sort of going through the background of the report and to give a little more context of what the report says and how we completed our process. As you know, there were a number of tax-advantaged or tax-exempt bonds issued for the West Haymarket JPA project overall. Those bonds are listed here and were listed in the report. They were all treated as a single purpose for tax compliance purposes when they were originally issued. The project was treated as one project, and the bonds were treated as being issued for that one singular project rather than separate projects for each tax-exempt bond, and that was to reflect the actual fact that it was one large project rather than separate projects. And that means that the tax compliance review is an overall review of the project rather than slices of it paid from different sources of bond proceeds. The reason for tax compliance, as you may know, is when tax-exempt or tax-advantage bonds are issued, and tax-advantage bonds are like Build America bonds, which the Joint Public Agency issued. One of the trade-offs for the lower interest rates or more favorable terms is the tax laws impose restrictions and rules on the Joint Public Agency, and specifically the one we're most concerned with is the general prohibition on private business use of bond finance property outside of a de minimis permitted amount of private business use. The agency has tax compliance procedures intended to help monitor compliance with these rules and requirements, and the report that was submitted to the Joint Public Agency is evidence of its commitment to complying with those procedures to ensure tax compliance throughout the term of each bond issue. Specifically each year to analyze and make sure that there is not an impermissible amount of private business use of the project. 10% is defined as the de minimis amount permitted under federal law. The process we went through was to gather information from the Joint Public Agency and city officials, including project expenditure records, how much the project costs and different components of the project, different sources of funding for the project, so bond proceeds and non-bond proceeds that were expended on the project. The report included an accounting of all of those sources of funds. The report also involved a comprehensive investigation and evaluation of any private business use of the bonds in the project. And for purposes of determining whether the amount of private business use of the bonds in the project, private business use was first allocated to non-bond proceeds. In other words, private business use was treated first as absorbed by non-bond proceeds or non-bond sources. So some of the occupation tax revenues that came in that were spent directly on the project were private business use was allocated to those sources first, and then any excess was allocated to the bonds. And the results of our report, which you may have seen if you waded through enough of the information, is that after giving effect to those allocations of the bond proceeds, we determined that approximately 2.6% of the bonds were being used in a private business use as of November of 2018, and therefore our assessment was that the bonds and the project were within the permitted limits of private business use. Again, 10% is the permitted limit, and that the project was not being used in a private business use in violation of any federal tax laws. Going forward, it's important that the Joint Public Agency continue to monitor use of the project to ensure continued compliance with the tax rules. We believe that the necessary processes, infrastructure, and documentation was developed in this first year to provide a solid foundation to build on, to provide invaluable streamlining and simplification of the review process in future years, so that those compliance efforts can be done timely on an annual basis.
Other questions?
What's our overall blended rate on the bonds that because we budgeted, I believe it was 5 or 5.5%, and I think it came in under that as we were lucky recipients of the market at the time.
Right, that is a good question. That's my recollection too. I don't have that fact at hand. What the blended overall rate is, I apologize.
I don't have the overall blended rate. I mean, I want to say it's somewhere like around 3.5. It was much lower than the anticipated 5%.
Could you let us know the next time?
Yeah, we could do that. Yeah.
I think one of the big issues, one of the questions that I had is just we want to make sure that we're in compliance for obviously for tax purposes.
Yeah.
And so every now and again going back and looking at these and making sure that we are in fact in compliance, I think is a good exercise to do. We owe it to the taxpayers of the community to make sure that we are fulfilling our duties. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
Going forward with into the future, assuming for the moment that the bonds will be paid off in the order that they come due with no prepayment or whatever. Mm-hmm. Is there any point in time where, because of the order of payment, a certain issuance of bonds, where we might come closer to being in violation or not?
No, I don't think so. I don't no. You mean, I mean, if the use stays the same the way it is now?
Well, I assume the degree of violation could be different with a particular issuance of bonds.
That's true generally. The nice thing about all of the bonds here, they're treated as one single issue for tax purposes. So we have the full amount of the bond issue to treat as one single tax project.
Okay. When you finish paying off one series of bonds, then the whole body that is one thing has a different composition, I assume, to some extent.
The calculations are based on the original principal amount of the bonds issued for the project overall. So we would still use the same permitted percentage, 10% of the overall total of bonds issued.
In spite of the debt going down.
Right. You
Okay.
still get that same measurement percentage as you had at the beginning of the project.
Mayor, I think, for your question there, we're going to evaluate this on an annual basis as we move forward, but I think the one thing that we have to continue to watch is the amount of parking spaces that are allocated for private use within the garages. I think that's probably the biggest thing that could potentially cause us tax issues. When they did a big analysis when they initially issued the bonds, and that took into account land sales and the suite deals, and so there's already private use that was considered, but really it's, I think, the amount of parking spaces moving forward that are allocated to private use. So that's one thing that we're going to have to continue to monitor in development deals.
Okay, but absent a change in use, we will continue to be within the law,
That's correct.
regardless of any payoff of the bonds and such.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Well, thank you both for getting into this and keeping watch for us. And it's my understanding that no action is required on this particular report. So we'll move on to agenda item number 4, which is approval of the minutes of the JPA meeting held February 21st, 2019.
No public comment on that?
It's been moved to... No, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No public comment.
She's asking if she could comment. Chris?
Jane, I suppose you could comment on it if you'd like. I'm sorry.
Jane Kinsey with Watchdogs. Who are using private parking spaces?
Chris, could you answer for us?
Chris Connolly, Acting City Attorney. In each of the garages that the JPA operates, we have contracts with a number of people and companies that are in the area and that we collect money from and that the JPA realizes revenues from.
Okay, so that would be like for their employees or for the
Correct.
company use or that kind of thing, okay? And when they're talking about private use, what other private use would there be?
None, that's it.
Anything, it doesn't include use of the arena by private companies or anything like that?
Not, yeah.
I can field that one. Thanks for the question. So general use of the arena for events is not considered impermissible private use. That's a normal expectation for operation of a venue like that and is permitted under federal tax laws. The private use, business use that we're thinking about are longer term arrangements. So like a parking arrangement for a year or so. So there were some uses that were contemplated at the time the project started. Leases of suites, for example, in the arena might be, those are longer term arrangements typically. Land sales within the JPA area were all things that were contemplated at the time. But no, the actual events themselves are not considered private business use.
Okay. When you say land, what do you mean? Like selling the land or renting the land?
I believe there were some components that were sold, yes.
Okay. And that wasn't,
That's
off the books?
That's considered private, under the federal tax rules, that's considered private business use. But again, there was equity allocated to that at the time, so that does not have any impact on the bonds.
Okay. What other kinds of arrangements would you consider to be not allowed? Can you think of any that might come up or that you would look at and not feel falling into that?
Well, if the joint public agency were to sell the arena to a private company, that would not be allowed.
Okay.
For example, that would be private use. Or if the whole thing were offloaded to someone else under a long-term 50-year lease, that would be a private business use that would not be permitted. And the rules generally are intended to prevent a governmental issuer building something not for its own use and purposes, but for a private company. So that's the general concept.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, let's move on to agenda item number 4. I believe there was a motion for approval of the minutes from the last meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Call the roll.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Claire?
Yes.
Beitler?
Yes, the minutes are approved. Agenda item number 5 is approval of the payment registers and review of the expenditure reports. From our finance office, Brandon Kaufman.
You have the payment registers included in your packet for February 2019. So we had total operating expenditures $2,658,573.57, and capital expenditures of $11,213.41. The primary expenditures in the operating budget, we had $351,882.26 for parking management. That represents 2 months worth of that. DEC billing of $208,652 to DEC. Which about 62% of that's billed back to the private sector, about $129,000. There's $18,791 for arena maintenance and repair, which is primarily for food, beverage, and equipment maintenance. And then the largest expenditure included in there was $2,068,192 to Union Title, and that was for the closing costs on the Jacobson property. The capital budget expenditures were primarily for environmental monitoring and pigeon control. Also included in the packet, you've got expenditure the reports which tie out to the payment registers, comparing to the current budget. And then we've got financial statements for the West Haymarket JPA as of February 28th, 2019. For year-to-date, total revenues of about $15,975,566. Expenditures of $14,387,936 for a surplus of $1,888,174. That comes to an ending balance of $40,931,349. You also have an income statement from SMG for Pinnacle Bank Arena, which had revenues of $2,494,049, expenditures of $2,276,264 for a current year-to-date surplus through January 31st of $217,785. So at the end of January, PBA had $442,332 in retained earnings that they've carried over. As of February 28th, the occupation taxes year-to-date were up 1.62%. However, we're still ahead compared to the original projections by 25%, which basically corresponds with the year 2030. With that, I'll stand for any questions.
I always like your ending, Brandon. Okay. Other questions of Brandon?
February's always a slow month anyway, isn't it?
For
Occupation tax generally, I mean, 1.6%, that's down from where we've had in the past. Fewer number of days, obviously.
Yeah, I think generally you're coming kind of off that Christmas rebound as well, where people aren't out spending as many dollars in the community. I think overall, in general, sales tax is trending a little bit lower. Food and beverage is a part of that, but fortunately, currently, that 1.62 is performing a little bit better than what the overall sales tax is performing at.
Any other questions of Brandon? Nope. Thank you. Is there public comment?
Jane Kinsey with Watchdogs. So there's repairs and maintenance under the PBA, And also repairs and maintenance are under the payment. So how is it determined which income statement expenditure will it fall under?
So for basically how the repair and maintenance works is that Pinnacle Bank completes those repairs and maintenance items for basically things that the city owns, or I'm sorry, the JPA owns equipment throughout the arena. So we're reimbursing them from the payment register. So we're paying back to SMG for those equipment and maintenance items.
What equipment is that? What equipment is that?
Oh, it's various things throughout the building. So, it's elevator, escalator maintenance, IT maintenance, painting, fire sprinkler inspections. It's just a lot of maintenance items throughout the arena. I've got a list here if you'd like to review that.
Okay, but they have, under their income statement, they have a list, and then the payment registers from the JPA also list repairs and maintenance. So who decides what goes into what?
Yeah, I think there is general maintenance that they have within their operating budget, but I think the majority of that is typically reimbursed from the JPA to SMG.
Okay, so that's in, where does that come? Where does that show?
Well, if you look at their operating budget statement that was included in the packet, I think you've got it right there. There's currently $560 year-to-date
Right.
in repairs and maintenance. So the majority of the repairs and maintenance are reimbursed to them back through the JPA.
Okay, so they decide that?
Tom, I don't know if there's other small maintenance and repair. But
They decide that?
We work with them on that repair and maintenance equipment
Okay.
line item.
So, which fund does that come out of? Which JPA fund does that come out of?
And that just comes out of our operating expenditures.
Okay, operating. And what's the arena contingency?
And where are you?
Back in your statement for the overall picture. It's on job cost report, maybe 6 or 7, 10 lines down.
Yeah, and that job cost report was basically for the capital side of the project, so there would have been a contingency item in there in case things came up during the capital side. We functionally moved through the majority of the capital. We've just got very minimal expenditures that are still kind of rolling through our capital side right now. So eventually, in the short term, we would love to close out that capital budget and just then focus all of the current expenditures going through the operating side.
Okay. So over the years, who's going to pick up these expenses for PBA?
For the repairs and maintenance?
Oh, yeah.
Well, any repairs and maintenance items will continue to be funded back from the JPA to whoever is operating the Pinnacle Bank Arena at the time.
Okay, so over the life of the JPA, they will continue to pick this up?
Well, their cost, their assets, basically, of the JPA that's included within the arena, so we'll continue to pay for those. Just like we have planned out major capital expenditures over the life of the arena.
Okay, so to answer my question, JPA will continue to pick up those expenditures until it's dissolved?
Yes.
Okay. So how, if JPA is picking this up, how can they show that the arena is solvent, or that it's making money, or it's paying its way, and so forth?
I think your 5 minutes is about up. Go ahead and answer the
Okay.
question.
Yeah, I think it's like the discussion we've had previously about, the amount of, it depends on where the funds are going into. So, the arena is about $5 million worth of expenditures. The amount of money that it generates is substantially more, but part of those funds go over to the West Haymarket JPA. And then we send a portion of those back to the arena as well.
But you don't show that.
Well, I mean, ideally, yeah, you're right. It'd be the simplest as possible, but unfortunately, that's not the way this is set up. And, for various reasons, the way that this was set up, monies that are generated by the arena come to the West Haymarket JPA. And I think they were set up that way for good reasons, including giving this board more control over the financial expenditures of the Pinnacle Bank Arena.
And not to give the city money, income for its books?
The city's generating no income from
Well, they are charging, the city's charging, aren't they,
for staff time reimbursed.
for staff?
Yeah.
Making some money. Okay.
Thank you, Jane. Is there further public comment? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve
So moved.
the payment register? As I understand it, the expenditure reports do not need to be approved, so is there a second to
Second.
approve the payment register? Been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Call the roll.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Claire?
Yes.
Beitler?
Yes, it is approved. We'll move on to agenda item number 6, Resolution WH 19-5, authorizing a contract for the purchase of basketball for Tom. Tom is not talking about it.
Well, at least not initially. Excuse me.
Okay.
Chris Connolly.
What questions
acting-
do I have to ask to get him up here?
Well, I'll give you, you'll find out here in
An
just a
assortment
minute.
of things, thank you.
There has been an effort to get a new basketball floor, and it's been on schedule. However, after the bid process, after we went through the bid process, apparently today, we were notified that there's going to be a bid protest. And so Tom can come up and tell you about the floor if he wants, but what I'm going to recommend that the board do at this point, since the JPA does not have a formal bid protest procedure, is that purchasing follow its normal procedures for the city with regard to how bid protests are handled, which would mean that purchasing would take a couple of steps, and depending on how those go, it would come back to this board to possibly hear the appeal for the bid protest. And I would recommend that this be taken up at the April 25th meeting at that time. So I will ask what you can do if you want, and I think that is a recommendation, I think, of those of us here, is that the contract still be approved today, but that the chair not sign the contract until we see how this protest goes. Because if it gets resolved between now and April 25th, then the chair could still go ahead and sign at that point, and then we can move on. If it's not settled by the 25th, then fine, we come back and we have our appeal hearing. And so with that, if any of you have questions of me or of Tom Lorenz, we'll be happy to answer.
I don't know if the rest of the board heard about this, but I didn't hear about this.
I found out about it 10 minutes before the board meeting.
Okay. Carl, you had a question?
Yeah. Give Chris the floor. Okay. Bad joke. Okay. So a couple of questions I have about the floor, the new floor and the old floor. So the new floor design, is the bid for a certain designed floor? Is the design yet to be determined?
You're talking about if you're talking about yeah, Tom can help with that.
So the bid is for a basketball floor. They're all 4x8 pieces. There's a certain number of pieces. The floor nominally is 60 by 120. The design on the floor is part of the price, and so the University of Nebraska continues to work through on refining what exact design. It doesn't really have a bearing on the price or what floor we do.
Okay, all right, thank you. And then the current floor, what happens to that?
So the way we bid it is in order to lower the price of the floor, we would return the floor to whoever the successful bidder was, and they would give us a credit back for that floor. What they'll do is go through, refurbish the floor, resand it, sell it to someone else. So the maximum value that we can get for the floor comes through that process as opposed to trying to sell it through some sort of auction or anything like that.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Tom, I assume this is the replacement of the floor that was anticipated by the original agreement with UNL?
It was.
No
And
more, no less?
no more, no, and actually it's a year, we had, the current floor went 1 year longer than we initially anticipated. And in looking forward, there is monies every 5 years for a replacement of the floor.
Okay. So what is the argument with regard to?
I don't know the specifics of the bid protest itself. I was made aware that a protest was filed, and I was asked what should we do about it. So this is my recommendation.
All right, and you feel comfortable, do we have to do anything formally to adopt city procedures?
I don't believe so. The important thing on any protest, we don't have to have a procedure. I'll start with that. I think it is advisable generally to have a procedure. We just need to show due process, though. There's no set rules that we must have. And so I think that using the procedure that the city typically uses, with the backstop being that the board can hear a full appeal if necessary, I think certainly satisfies the due process requirements if we choose to go that route, and I think that's appropriate under the circumstances. We'd have a delay of about a month, which will not create any serious problems if the board, after hearing the evidence, rejects the appeal. We can still move on. If it decides to accept the appeal, we'll deal with it at that time. But in terms of the procedure, this will not severely impact the schedule.
No coach, no floor? Are we going to have players?
Well, one is looking to transfer already, so.
Carl?
Yeah, Chris, since we do not have a protest policy in place, should we make a motion to follow the city's policy, or is that?
For purposes of today, you could do that. That would be okay if you wish to do that. I think we would have followed it anyway, just as a matter of course. And it won't necessarily bind you to doing it this way every time down the road, but at the same time, I think it may be appropriate for the situation.
Okay. I would make such a motion if you're
Yeah,
ready.
Tim, did you have anything to discuss?
No. My issue was timing, and let's just keep it moving forward. And so if we want to make a motion to adopt the city's policy relative to how they handle protests, I'm happy with that.
Just to clarify really quick, there's two main differences. One, the city policy, I think, under that protest period goes to the mayor for a decision versus the county's policy goes to the board. So if you wanted that to come back to the board, you might consider more of the county's policy, which,
That's okay.
yeah.
That's fine.
Okay, I would move that. And second.
I'll second it.
Okay, we're moving to follow the county processes.
County bid protest procedure for this agreement.
Are there other differences in the county proceedings other than that one?
Purchasing agent will come and tell us.
Bob Wallace, City County Purchasing Agent. So the main difference is that it's the board that makes the decision rather than the mayor. The only other difference that's really significant is on the city side, there's a $500 fee that the person has to file in order to appeal a decision that's made by the purchasing agent. On the county side, they do not have that $500 fee because the county's not allowed to take in money for that purpose. So that would be the only other primary difference.
So we would pay a small fee with no compensation for that fee.
Right, there would be no charge for them to continue on with the process for compared to a $500 for the city.
Okay, so the motion is to adopt in its entirety the county's purchasing procedures with respect to contesting. For this agreement only. I'm not suggesting. For this agreement only.
Right. I'm not suggesting you adopt this for all bid protests. We can take that up at a different time.
Good.
Okay. Is that clear enough to you?
Yes.
Is that clear enough to you all? All right. Let's finish the public comment on this, and then we'll make that motion.
Wait, I think you have a motion outstanding, though, on accepting the county procedure, right?
Right.
So you still want to just do county, you want to do?
I'd like to allow the public to comment before we act on it.
Very well.
So Jane Kinsey with Washington. So run this by me again, Mr. Conley. Protest about the bidding process or what? Or the cost or what? And by whom?
I don't have the answers to those questions. Like I said, I was informed of this just minutes before the meeting. So all I know is that there is a bid protest, and I don't know what their complaint is.
Mm-hmm. So how can you act on it if you don't know what the complaint is?
Well, I'm asking them to go ahead and approve it, but that the chair not sign the contract until it's resolved. In the meantime, we'll have about a month to try and resolve it.
Is this about the purchase of this? It's about this new floor.
Correct.
Okay. And was it bid?
It was bid.
Okay. And this was the low bid by Robin Sports.
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. Who else bid? You don't know that either?
I don't have that here.
How can you act on it if you don't have any of this information? You don't want the public to know about it?
No, you know.
We're not acting upon it, Jane, and this is not an argumentative forum. This is an information forum for you, and it's a place where you can state your objections to anything, but it's not an argumentative forum.
Well, I'm not arguing, I'm asking questions, but my statement is that the public needs to know this, and there should not.
The public is knowing it.
What?
The public is knowing it. It's being announced at a very fresh moment in time.
They have no,
Knowing
he has
it at
no
the same
information.
time that we're knowing it, Jane. You got the information at the very moment we did.
Okay, so we say it should be delayed. Any
Pardon me?
action is what our input, the public input is, because it needs to be, the public needs to have access to this, not just the board.
We're giving them the rules by which they will hear the matter and resolve the matter. And depending on how it's resolved, it may or may not be done.
Okay. And will the public know
Certainly.
after this is taken care of?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Chris, point of
All right, I want
clarification.
that in the minutes, that the public will know.
Point of clarification. The bid as it was received was done through the appropriate bidding process.
That's correct.
And that was handled pursuant to the bidding processes that we've had.
That is correct.
Which would presume it was the best bid, lowest bid, et cetera, that we
And
received.
purchasing would have to answer that question.
But that's,
I can
we follow.
That's the way we typically do it.
Doing this. So the question, as I interpreted Jane's question was, who's objecting? We don't know.
Yes, I don't know.
What's the purpose of, what's the reason for their objection? We don't know. Is there legitimacy to that? We don't know. Is it lower? We don't know. It's not, I mean, this by itself, and so what we're doing is we're saying, yeah, we're gonna approve this, but for purposes of that protest, in order to keep things going forward, we're gonna have a month to look at the protest. If there's something that comes up, we're gonna negate this acceptance. But we're just in the interest of continuing to move it forward.
And to be clear, the board may be approving it, but I'm asking that the
signing it.
chair not sign it,
Right.
correct, until it's
Exactly.
resolved.
I just wanted to point out that all of the bid results and the information for the bid is online on our e-bid system
Exactly.
for the public to see at all times. And we did put in the requirements, the specifications that were based on what Tom believes is what's needed for the floor and the way that they use it. So the award is being made to the lowest responsive bidder, who's not necessarily the lowest bidder. And that is according to the way that all of our purchasing is done.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Right, is there any further public comment? All right, with that, let's go back to the motion. Chris, would you recite the motion as you understand it? And as you recite it, we will
Okay,
make that the motion, and I'll ask these two gentlemen to support, or to, what's the word I'm looking for?
To vote on it?
Yeah.
Yeah, but we do have one on the floor already, right?
The motion is currently pending, is the motion to use the county protest procedures for purposes of this agreement only. So that's the only vote that's out there right now.
Okay.
And so if you,
Okay, and there's nothing more we need to do other than adopt the protest procedures?
correct, at the moment.
We have formally adopted all other procedures that relate to this?
In terms of purchasing,
Yes.
I
And bidding-
believe we,
and
well,
bidding,
by
the bidding process.
By law,
related to that.
by law, AJPA uses the County Purchasing Act as its basis for doing purchasing. But the County Purchasing Act doesn't have bid protest procedures in it per se. And so that's something that each county or JPA would adopt on its own. And so now the county does have its own protest procedures. And so I'm just suggesting that for the reasons that were stated, we go ahead and use the county protest procedures for this agreement only, with the idea being that we can examine later on whether or not we want to adopt those on a permanent basis. But at least for this contract, we'll use it here.
Okay.
And so that's what this motion is about that is on the floor.
You guys feel that's clear enough?
Yes.
All right, is there any further discussion on the motion on the floor? With that, call the roll on WH 19-5.
Eskridge,
Yes.
Blair,
Yes.
Beitler,
Yes. Okay, now,
No,
okay.
go ahead.
I was going to say, now the next motion, which is the one I'll ask you to do, is to approve this, but with instructions to the chair that the agreement not be executed until or unless the bid protest is dismissed or fully resolved. And if not, that the matter be brought back for the April 25th JPA board meeting for a hearing.
State that again for me. I want to be sure that I'm clear. You're not asking for the adoption of WH 19-5, but of a modified motion?
Well, yes, the motion would be modified, correct. That it be approved with instructions to the chair that the agreement not be executed until or unless the bid protest is dismissed or fully resolved. If not fully resolved, and a hearing is necessary, that it be brought back for hearing at the April 25th JPA board meeting.
Okay. Are you gentlemen all right with that? If so, I'll accept that as the motion.
So we can't tell the party that won the bid, we're not suggesting they go ahead and do anything.
Correct. They can't do anything until the agreement's signed.
And the agreement is not going to be signed until the April meeting?
Well, if it's resolved sooner than that, if they either, it's either dismissed or in discussions with purchasing, they determine that their original reasons for protest were not good, and they say, okay, we're not going to do this anymore. If they go away, then the chair would be authorized to execute it. And of course, we'll have to document that. But with that documentation, the chair would be authorized to sign.
So what's the significance of doing that from a timing perspective? I mean,
it would allow things to move faster if it gets resolved. Let's say it got resolved within 2 weeks. It would allow the contract to get signed 2 weeks earlier than April 25th and allow the work to begin sooner. Although we don't have a real tight timeline on this, the idea was to get all this done certainly before the next basketball season. And with an extra month's worth of time, it looks like we may end up getting it installed in late September as opposed to early to mid-September is what we were looking at. Okay. So it pushes back that date a little bit. So we're trying to just make sure we have all the time that we can get. The alternative, which you're entitled to do, is to just hold this over until the next meeting on April 25th.
I'm inclined to just say, let's put it to the next meeting. I mean, if there's not we're talking about next basketball season, and we shouldn't have that much, it shouldn't be that difficult to make it by then.
Okay, so there was a motion, but I don't believe there was a second.
Is there any timing feature requirement as to the executing the date or accepting the bid?
I don't believe so. That shouldn't be an issue. In terms of it'll be open until, I don't think they have a deadline on well, there may be a deadline on when the bid has to be accepted, but I wouldn't believe that 30 days would cause a problem for that.
Okay, well, without objection, since there's no second, I'll consider the motion withdrawn and this item taken off the agenda until our next meeting and perhaps reformulated at some point before that to meet the contingencies of the situation.
In fact, you may want to do a motion to hold it over for the next meeting.
I would so move.
Second.
Moved and seconded to hold it over. Further discussion? Call the roll.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Claire?
Yes.
Beitler?
Yes.
And then you'll also work on procedures for bid disputes so that we could have something put into our...
We can bring something more permanent back to you.
I think
sure.
it'd be good.
Yep.
All right, agenda item number 7, WH19-6, a resolution relating to a right of entry.
Okay.
You've got the floor again, Chris.
Yes. Items 7 and 8 are really kind of related. There are entities that have an interest in what we've been referring to as Block 4 in the West Haymarket area and want to have access to the property to look at it and make determinations for how appropriate it would be for development. This is very typical. We've done this with all the other lots in the West Haymarket area. And so this is really kind of a standard kind of a document. Having said that, after I sent out the original right of entry, there was a request by council, by Kent Seacrest, representing Edo, to make a couple of changes to it, which he did to allow for Phase 2 testing, which could result in some drilling if they wish. And so what you should have before you is a motion to amend that somebody would need to make a motion on to substitute another version of the right of entry as it applies to Edo, which would be number 7. Number 8, that one has not been changed and still remains in its original form.
What are the implications of the change, if any?
Well, like I said, first of all, they indicated that they're doing this in conjunction with LHDC, and that is who is in number 8. Then the other part was that they wanted to have the ability to do Phase 1 and Phase 2 testing. Well, Phase 2 testing is what would actually be on the property, and so they wanted to make sure that that was clear. So that was added language. And I know we don't normally have written motions to amend, but I sort of borrowed what we do with the city, because this change didn't come to me until less than 24 hours before the meeting.
Okay. What implications, if any, does this have to a subsequent development agreement should it evolve?
None. This is just simply giving them right of access. And any other access agreements that we would grant to someone would be on a similar form that would sort of be negotiated.
This just gives them the ability to go on the property prior to buying, and if they were going to buy it, this would be done during due diligence process.
That's correct, and this is, and nothing's happened, but at the same time, parties are interested. We want to let them have the opportunity to explore the property and see if it fits what they're doing.
Okay, any additional questions? Thank you, Chris. This is our public comment on agenda item number 7.
You're not taking them together? 7 and 8?
No.
Good.
No? Okay. Is this what exactly is this? Is this the land for, that you're selling to WRK Chief or Canopy or whatever they're calling them?
Well, that was Block 2, and that's a deal that's already been completed.
It is. Okay, so what is this land then? And who's buying this?
Well, nobody's buying it yet.
Okay.
But the idea is that these parties want to look at the land to see if it would be something that they would
Before
find
they'll
out.
even make a contract
Correct.
with you? Okay,
Correct.
and so they're anonymous at this time?
Well, the parties that are going on there are listed on the contracts, on these Edo and LHDC, Lincoln Haymarket Development Corporation. So those are the parties that are going on the property. Now, whether or not they're the ones that would actually buy the property, we'll have to see.
Okay, but these people are looking to see if it's clean, more or less?
Yes.
Okay, so, but you're not willing to say who the people who are looking at this, or who requested?
I'm not at liberty to give more information on
Okay,
that.
private people?
Private parties.
Okay. And so they just want to be sure about it. How is, well, are you taking 8 up separately?
It's up to the board, but.
Okay, are you taking 8 up separately?
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything else that Edo is doing except?
Just what it says in the document.
Okay. And that was to see it's clean?
To examine it and be able to go onto the property and look at
Okay.
it.
I don't know how to answer this. It looks, or ask this, and maybe the chair can tell me, or the board can tell me. It looked like they were Edo and the other one were doing the same thing.
Correct.
They are, okay. What is that like, double duty to make sure extra,
Well, we try to make sure that each party that goes onto our property, onto the JPA property, has one of these agreements.
Okay. And how will, okay, I'll ask 8 how that will differ. I can do that? Is that it?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Is there further public comment? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve WH 19-6? It's been moved to approve, it's seconded to approve, moved and seconded. Any further comment from the board? If not, call the roll.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Claire?
Yes.
Beitler?
Yes, it is approved. Agenda item number 8 is a related matter we were discussing, the same kind of right of entry with a second party. WH 19-7, I'm not sure you need to explain much about this, Chris, but if you want to give some further explanation, fine.
The only thing I would tell you is that this one did not request, LHDC did not request the same changes that EDO requested on theirs. So the one for LHDC is as I originally submitted it. Which means effectively that they have not requested phase 1 and phase 2 environmental site assessments and the ability to do that kind of testing. But quite frankly, if they came back to ask for it, we might have to do another one, but we wouldn't have any objection to them doing that.
Is the first matter covering the same land as the second matter?
It is.
Okay.
Both of them apply to Block 4.
All right, any questions of Chris?
Yeah, it's just, don't want to get too involved in this, but these are separate parties considering development on this property. They aren't working in conjunction with one another?
I probably can't discuss that very much right now.
Okay.
Any additional questions? Public comment?
Jane Kinsey with Watchdogs. So it looked like they were doing the same thing. How will it be different?
The attorney for EDO made requests for certain changes to allow them to do certain other testing, the phase 1 and phase 2 environmental site assessments.
Okay.
That's really the biggest change. EDO requested that, LHDC did not. In the EDO one, they put into the recital that they were working in cooperation with LHDC. LHDC in theirs chose not to request to say that they were working with EDO. So those are the differences.
So that they're not coordinating or sharing information?
I can't get into that.
Okay. But you're saying that EDO requested something different?
Right, and that's the one that the board just approved.
Okay,
And that was online last night.
okay. So that's the difference between the two?
Correct.
Okay. And this is the same?
Same property.
Same property. Okay, thank you.
Is there any further public comment? Thank you, Chris. Seeing none, is there a motion on WH 19-7?
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. I interpret that the motion to approve. Any further discussion? Call the roll.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Claire?
Yes.
Beitler?
Yes. The resolution's approved. Agenda item number 9, resolution 19-8 relating to a contract with National Concrete Cutting relating to the demolition of the Jacobson building.
This contract did go through a bid process, and I don't have all the particulars on who else would have bid or what the amounts were, but this was the lowest. This is quite a bit lower than we had anticipated. It's unclear to me as to whether or not this particular contractor is going to disassemble the building, but I know several of I'm aware that some of the contractors that were bidding were looking at physically disassembling the building and reassembling it somewhere else. And so this is the lowest responsible bid. But I can't tell you at this moment exactly how long they're going to take, because obviously if they're disassembling, it'll take longer than if they simply knock it down. But in any event, we think this is the best bid, and and there are no protests, and so we'll ask that the board approve it.
Is there a time by which they need to have it done?
There's not, from the JPA standpoint, there's not a date that it's required to be done. But we want them to get it done as soon as reasonably possible. But if it was going to save us some money by allowing them to disassemble it, we were willing to allow that to occur. But it's not going to, this still shouldn't take many months.
What is the contractual language that controls that?
I'm sorry,
What is the contractual language that controls that?
well, let me find it here. This contract, final completion of the project shall be 60 days from the notice to proceed. So I guess would be one of the.
60 days.
60 days,
From the notice to proceed?
correct, which I expect will go out shortly.
Okay. All right, very good. Are there additional questions of Chris?
And from our standpoint, we don't care whether they tear it down or disassemble it, do we?
No.
So,
Yeah, like I said, I think we ended up saving some money. If somebody wanted to disassemble it, it gets more value. So if that's what they're doing, then we did well with it.
Know somebody that's interested in a cheap refrigerator?
not today.
It would be a big one.
All right, Chris, thank you. Is there any additional public comment on this item?
Jane Kinsey with Watchdogs. So does this have to do with pouring concrete on this area?
No, I don't believe so. This company apparently does demolition work as well.
Okay.
And so they'll be tearing down or taking apart the building. They will be tearing out some concrete that's already there. But I'm not aware that they're going to be pouring any concrete there. If they did, it would be small patches to replace sidewalk or something perhaps.
Okay, so this really has nothing to do with this issue over here?
No, different piece of property.
Okay. And went through the bid process, you said,
Yes.
and it will go forward immediately?
Should, yes.
Any further public comment? If not, is there a motion to approve this 19-8?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Further discussion? Call the roll.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Claire?
Yes.
Beitler?
Yes, the resolution is approved. The next meeting date without objection will be Thursday, April 25th, 2019 at 2:30 PM at the City County Building, Council Chambers, first floor. Is that agreeable to everybody?
That works.
You're okay, Tim?
Yep.
We do?
All
Do we
right.
have a special meeting coming up or not?
On April 15th.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, to be clear, we're going to be scheduling a special meeting on.
And I should have said
April 15th.
next regular meeting.
Okay, there we go.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded to adjourn. Call the roll.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Claire?
Yes.
Beitler?
Yes, we are adjourned.